Well, happy Friday. It's 1 o'clock Central Time, and that means it's TuckerAllen Live right here on Facebook. And we're back. And today we're going to kind of break down some of the common terms that people use, and we're going to talk about pour over wills. We've talked a lot about that for months and months, and we're joined by Teresa. So welcome again, Teresa.
Hi, Scott.
Well, happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. And I think the goal we've always done, whether it's our virtual town hall, whether we're doing a podcast or we're doing this, TuckerAllen Live, is to take, we all hear about certain terms in estate planning, and we want to try to break them down so that people use these terms interchangeably. And so today, we're going to talk about pour over wills, but again, let's do a refresher on the difference between a will and a trust.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hoping today will really just be a refresher because I think we've done a few sessions where we're just assuming everybody already knows, but just in case, just a quick refresher course. So the difference between a will and a trust, really, they're both estate planning instruments aimed at kind of making the probate process a little more efficient or to avoid it entirely. And I like to have my clients think of wills and trusts as governing two different pots of assets after somebody passes away. A will governs anything that's going through probate, which is unfortunate. Something has to go through probate, but it's just anything that doesn't have a beneficiary. The will is like an instruction sheet to the probate judge saying, hey, these assets are coming through the gates of probate. Probate judge, I had thought about this when I was alive. I want you to follow these instructions. Whereas the trust governs any assets that are inside of that trust basket that we've been talking about. And then in order for things to fall into the trust basket, that's where clients have to do a bit of that legwork to title their assets. That's their homework with the trust while they're still alive. But it really saves a lot of time and effort down the road.
So, we've talked about, if you don't have anything, at least do a will. But realistically, the trust is a really good thing to do and tag along with it. But I know the question, as I'm thinking through it, someone's thinking, well, if I really need a trust, why do I even bother doing a will, right? I mean, you have to have both. And what's the point, I guess, if trust is so important?
Yeah, so ideally, in an ideal world, if you have a trust and you're super vigilant and you do all of your homework and you know where all of your assets are and things are titled with the trust, technically, I guess you don't need a will. But most of the time, if you're like 99% of people, you're going to miss some asset, or you might acquire an asset later on and you just forget about your trust. So whenever you have a trust, we at TuckerAllen, we always create a will. And most of the time, when people come in with a trust, they normally have a will. And this is because the will is more like a safety net. So you know how I said the will governs anything that's going through probate. The idea of a trust is that anything with this basket is not going through probate. So if you mistakenly or just didn't get around to it, left something outside of this basket, then it's going through probate. And then your will is that safety net that's saying, hey, judge, I didn't mean to leave it out of my trust. Can you pour it over into my trust?
It's like I always try to think of examples that are sometimes ridiculous in comparing them to, but we were just talking off camera about hiking. So it's like if you want to attach yourself to the wall of this mountain as a safety mechanism to make sure you don't fall over. You probably can climb it and you probably can get to the top, but it probably makes sense just to make sure. Or like a seatbelt. A lot of people choose, probably a bad idea, not to wear a seatbelt. They choose not to have a will. Probably a bad idea. Same kind of comparison, right? It's always just a secondary
That's a good
precaution.
analogy. I like the kind of as you're climbing a wall on the mountain. Exactly. You want to know that there's a safety net down there.
Yeah.
So that in case you kind of misstep, there's something to catch it, and then your instructions are still there for any assets that you didn't title with the trust.
So if you're watching live right now and you have a question, go ahead and submit it in the comment section. We'll try to get to it. But, we talk about it, as you mentioned, I know you've used the word the basket and the pouring into. So that's the example. So if I have a trust and I have a will, but I've done a really good job and I've titled everything I need. I've funded the trust. I've made sure my house is titled in the trust, or my cars are TOD or whatever it is. And you suggest if I miss something, inevitably, especially if you're younger, healthy, middle-aged, healthy, whatever it is, and time goes by, the will capture the things that perhaps you didn't put into the will or trust or title?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, especially for younger individuals, if they have a trust and a will, their will has an extra ability where you definitely still want to have a will, because a will is where you appoint guardianships for any minor kids that you have. Your trust doesn't do that. So when I say that you want to think of the will as a safety net, I mean that for assets. So with your assets, you want to make sure if you have a trust, you're really titling that with a trust. But if you are a younger couple or a younger individual with minor kids in your custody, then you want to make sure that no matter what, you also have that will. That it's not just a safety net. It's a safety net plus the place where you get to make sure you designate somebody to take care of your kids should something happen.
So the will, the trust, I mean, the trust is kind of extra security, extra planning, especially in light of changes coming up. Gosh, I know probably in the next few weeks, we're going to talk about the administration's changes that they're going to be proposing on estate planning. And it's, that's why you should be considering things and making sure that if you're, one of those individuals who may hit the maximum, who knows what that's going to be, whether it's $1 million or whatever it is. The trust helps that, right?
Yeah, so the trust is a lot more flexible in terms of navigating those changes that come down the road. As long as you do the TOD, the POD, title everything with the trust so that you know that the trust is going to govern those assets, there's provisions you can build in later on. So if and when those changes are implemented, highly recommend for our clients to meet with their attorney, estate planning attorneys, and say, hey, is my trust still good? Like, am I still mitigating against any estate tax that might be kind of imposed on my assets now that I'm actually more concerned about this issue? And yeah, there are definitely provisions to the main strategy is to say, okay, what are ways for some of my assets to not be counted as part of my estate so that the total estate value is lowered, and then you don't have to worry about the tax issue again. Yeah. But that's just kind of different provisions can be put in place to help with those strategies. So
I was reading some of the changes or the stepped up basis. I think particularly you had the warning when we were talking about, the changes with the new Biden administration. That seems to be the issue, which they're going to recoup millions and millions of dollars by eliminating the stepped up basis. So that's just another reason to think about the trust, and it always brings up the legacy protection program that TuckerAllen has, and that is where you get to meet with you or one of the attorneys every year to talk about changes that may need to be made, whether it's new laws. I know was it the CARES Act that came into play?
The Secure Act, yeah.
The
retirement account.
Right. And so I think that's so important when we just talk about will and trust. But ultimately, let's talk about in the last few minutes we have the words. What are the differences between, people always use last will and testament, pour over will, and a will? So everyone says, oh, my last will and testament. It's very formal. But are there differences between the three?
Yeah, so I really hate how confusing it is for, I don't know why they name things like this where every instrument has the name will in it, because it's really confusing to clients. If you're not an estate planning attorney, it's really confusing. So yeah, I want you to think of your last will and testament is what normally people think of when they think of my will, where I get to say who gets what and who my executor will be. That's your last will and testament, okay? There's another thing called a pour over will. A pour over will is actually a last will and testament, okay? It's the same thing. So your pour over will is still your last will and testament. The only reason we call it a pour over will is because you have a trust. So when you have a trust, your last will and testament, it's colloquially called the pour over will because essentially its function is to pour things that are going through probate into your trust. Okay, so those are the two things. The other thing that has the word will in it is called the living will. The living will is nothing like what you think about when you think about a will. The living will is a healthcare directive document. Yeah. It's a document where you make that direct testament to your doctor pertaining to end of life care. So it's where you say, hey, doc, while I'm alive, I've made this first person choice, like my voice is in this document to say that these are the treatments I want, these are the treatments I don't want if you determine that I'm at the end of life stage. So that's called a living will. It's really confusing why it's called that, but it is. So
no one's going to come in and say, yes, I would like a pour over will. Because that's the thing is people hear the terms and they think that's what it is, but they will come to you and say, I want a living will, because we talked about this. And in fact, I'm having meetings with skilled nursing facilities in which their residents don't have, the healthcare directives. They come into the facility and it's mind-boggling. The fact that we've got to get, that's the most basic thing in estate planning that you can do that's so easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
Someone take your finances, to take your healthcare decisions, just to have your wishes known, period, right?
Absolutely. So I think with the living will, sometimes people are like, well, if I have a healthcare power of attorney, I don't really need it. But you run into we're getting a little off topic, but I think this is really important. I think with healthcare powers of attorney, if for whatever reason you appointed co-agents or so that they can't decide what to do about your end of life, or maybe the person you appointed as your healthcare agent ends up not being able to let you go when it's clearly your wishes to be able to live in comfort and not to endure more pain, having a living will kind of ensures that your wishes will be followed for those kind of more extreme end of life circumstances, even if you have a healthcare power of attorney. So those are just really critical documents to always keep in mind, especially in this pandemic. So
it's easy to create. And again, I always think I'm trying to always rack my brain to think of visuals and examples. I remember I was going to a water park with my kids, and there's this massive bucket at the top of the water park that every kid wants to get underneath it because there's a faucet on the top and it's filling the bucket. And eventually that bucket spills and pours on top of everybody, and they love it. And I think it's hilarious because they get drenched. And that's the theory I'm thinking of in the pour over will, right? So in your bucket, it never spills unless you start filling it. And then when it does spill, it spills into the trust. That's kind of below it, right?
Yeah, so the goal, that's actually a perfect analogy. I feel like if I were at that water park, I'd be like, oh, that's a pour over well.
Yeah, right? And that's what we're trying to break it down so that people have a visual. And when we think these words, ignore what they really mean, but think of the visual, right? So I think that's a good
so
example.
The pour over will is your last will and testament. And it's just saying, hey, if you have a trust, like if somebody were to come in and say, hey, I want a pour over will, then I would say, what do you want to trust to then? Because you can't have one without the other. And you're right. It's that pour over will is just saying, okay, whatever you missed, I'm here to catch it. And if it catches something, then it pours.
Right. It doesn't keep it there. And it's not like this cone that never moves and it fills and it still stays in probate. If you have the trust with it, because that's what you have, right? So it pours right into it and it's empty again. So it means the things in your will are empty because it's going to avoid the probate. That's the whole point. And I think that what breaks it down for people as they're thinking about it. But I mean, the importance, we can't, pass up on the idea that it sounds easy, it's great, but the point is do something about it. I mean, if you don't have one or the other, great first step is the healthcare directive and the powers of attorney. Great first step. Hey, think about the will. Hey, think about doing the will with the pour over and the trust and making sure you get it done. Again, having a conversation with you, the best hour they'll ever spend just to get information. And so I think that these are great things to talk about today. So thanks, Teresa, for joining.
Thanks for having me again.
So we'll continue to do this. We're going to show up on Fridays at 1:00 and just talk about simple things. We'll use crazy examples just like we did with this water park theory, but we really just want to break it down so it makes it more understanding for you, because it can be complicated because people use words that are so interchangeable, personal representative, testatrix, these crazy words that people use and they don't really necessarily know what it's used for. And so that's why we do this 15 minutes. Just real quick, real brief. So make sure you also tune in and check out TuckerAllen.com. You can schedule a consult right there on the website. But the virtual town hall coming up, that is going to be here in April. We want you to go into the website, register. You can log in, log on, ask questions of the TuckerAllen attorneys, and get answers right there during the virtual town hall. So we look forward to seeing you at the town hall. And we want to see you again here next Friday. So go ahead and check us out. Follow us on social media, and then check out the website. Plenty of information and resources there, just like we were talking about today. So until next Friday, enjoy the holiday weekend. See you next week.